Solidarity protests have taken place around the world in the wake of George Floyd's death, but U.S. adversaries have seized on the chaos that has rocked the country. Security experts say Russia sees the demonstrations as a chance to exploit fractures in society, as it has for years in the past.
If they haven't been involved to date, I have no doubt that they will get involved here in the immediate future, in part because this is exactly what Russia did during the 2016 election.
Based on my experience, this is right out of the Russian playbook as well.
A Kremlin spokesperson denies involvement in the protests, saying, "We've never meddled in U.S. affairs and we're not going to interfere now." But Moscow is reinforcing President Donald Trump's blame of the radical left and certain Democrats. Citing a Russian professor, the state news agency says the protests will bolster far-left groups inside the Democratic Party. In Beijing, the government says it condemns all forms of racial discrimination. But China's foreign ministry spokesperson also used the unrest to hit back at the U.S. for supporting protests in Hong Kong, invoking the last words of George Floyd next to a State Department message on Hong Kong. In an official Communist Party newspaper, an opinion piece said U.S. politicians should do their jobs and help solve problems in the U.S. instead of trying to create new problems and troubles in other countries.
China has a terrible history with racism, and particularly around the coronavirus. Africans and African Americans who are in China were discriminated against. I think that the reason you're seeing so much media coverage of the protests raging across the United States right now in Chinese media has very little to do with China's interest in racial justice or George Floyd. It's about how does a government respond to a protest movement when there are systemic issues of related to rights, related to rule of law, related to injustices.
China is also promoting Russia's state-sponsored media outlet RT.
Interestingly enough, it's happening much in the same way that we've watched occur most recently in places like Hong Kong, where protesters took to the streets.
It's not just China that's pointing that out. It's governments around the world. Democracies and authoritarian governments around the world are shocked by what they're seeing in the United States.
Meanwhile, in Tehran, the foreign ministry quoted Martin Luther King Jr., and Iranian Minister Javad Zarif called the chokehold used on George Floyd nothing new, the same maximum pressure tactic used on 80 million Iranians for 2 years.
The Chinese and the Russians, they want to see more of this, right? This plays into their ability to say, look, America's just like us. They crack down on protesters too. They treat their people poorly. That is not correct. We have a system of law and order, and it works with judges that have life tenure.
Sasha Ingber, Newsy, Washington.